A professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Finance has gone viral after revealing that a significant percentage of her students have no idea how much the average American worker makes in a year. So now, this is very, very interesting because it really does show you how little the American people know about other people's financial situations and why we have such rampant inequality, or it's one explanation of why there's such rampant inequality and why there's seemingly so much pushback when it comes to measures to try to remedy that inequality. So now Nina Strominger, a professor of legal studies and business ethics at Wharton, took to Twitter on Wednesday to share that 25%, a full quarter of her students, believe that the average salary of a worker in the United States is over 6 figures. That's what? One of them even responded believing that the average was $800,000. That can't be real. That can't be real. Nobody can believe that. That's got to be troll. Like that's troll level shit right there. Like, I don't know, $800,000. I don't know. Oh, what could it be? What could it be, Michael? How much could it cost? $10? I mean, you're kidding, right? You're kidding. And so now she said one of them thought it was $800K, really not sure what to make of this. The real number is about $45,000. So I know what to make of this. It means we've got a pretty big problem with the understanding of wealth and income inequality, and a huge misunderstanding about what actually makes up the middle class in this country, who actually is middle class. So now there are varying metrics state by state, but generally, according to economists, if your household income for 2020 was between $50,000 and $135,000, then you'd be considered by them as a member of the middle class. Now, again, there's so much disagreement around these numbers. So it's really hard to kind of pin down where it actually is, because everybody says something different. And everybody believes, as I'm going to show you in a poll, everybody believes that they're middle class when they're not. Now, according to Social Security Administration, the average U.S. annual wage last year was $53,000, and the median wage was actually lower at $34,612. Now, most Americans tend to fall into that lower number and yet believe that they are members of the middle class. And yet, there are also, on the other end of the spectrum, there are people that are making 6 figures that also believe, wrongly, that they're a member of the middle class. Very, very strange. All right, according to a 2017 survey by Northwestern Mutual, about 70% of Americans consider themselves to be in the middle class. Now, of course, when you go back further to a 2015 report from Pew Research, it actually shows that the middle class has been shrinking over the past 4 decades and now makes up only about half of the U.S. total population. Now, it's 2020 now. Oh, I'm sorry, 2022, right? It's 2022, and we had a pandemic. And, I'm guessing that number, as a result of the pandemic, has fallen even further. Now that there are less people in the actual middle class. Okay? And so, now, again, that seems to be a part of it. I think that most people are like, oh, yeah, I make $40,000 a year. I'm middle class, yeah. And then, of course, you have people that are making $250,000 a year, for a family of 2, for example, that are like, oh, yeah, what are you talking about? I'm totally middle class. And sure, let's be honest, a lot of it has to also do with where you are geographically located. For example, if you were living in New York and LA, well, the cost of living is so incredibly high in those cities, Seattle too, that if you're making $150,000, you might actually be middle class there. So there's a lot of skewing in the numbers here, which is interesting. But now let's also talk about the bubble, right? So now the Wharton School demographic you're not going to be surprised, according to a 2017 New York Times report, found that the median family income of a student from Penn is about $195,500, and 71% of them come from the median top 20%. Not median, just top 20%. Sorry, misspoke. So now that's Wharton, right? Now understand that, like, okay, it's not everybody that is rich that gets into Wharton, right? Or these Ivy League schools. Let me give you an example. Great example, Cenk Uygur, founder of the Young Turks. Guy went to Wharton, an immigrant, son of an olive farmer, not exactly super rich, all right? Went to Wharton, but then again, on the other end of the spectrum here, you have Donald Trump, who also went to Wharton. So there's a big gap and a little bit of a spectrum. But generally, when it comes to Ivy League schools, most of the people who go there are pretty rich. And you will run into this question, if you go there, where do you summer? See, that's how you know you're around rich people. When they ask you, where do you summer? What do you mean, where do I summer? Somebody asked me that question, like, what do you mean? What do you mean, where do I summer? I'm in my room with the air conditioner. That's where I summer. All right, you know, and I don't want to move. I'd rather stay in that position. And so, understand that these people are incredibly cut off from the actual real working class and middle class experience. But now there's more information here. At 38 colleges in America, including 5 in the Ivy League, Dartmouth, Princeton, Yale, Penn, and Brown, more students came from the top 1% of the income scale than from the entire bottom 60%. When you're in that bubble, everything's pretty good for you. You got it going on. Everything's great. You got stocks, you got investments, you got money saved. You're doing pretty great. All right? Your colleges, look, your university, your education's paid for. You think they're getting student loans? No, of course not. Well, why would you ever get student loans when you can just borrow from mom and dad? Mom and dad will pay for it. I'm not saying that's the case in every single case. But generally, I mean, yeah, mom and dad, they're usually paying for this college, so nobody's ever touched student loan. I mean, how much could college be, Michael? $10? I'm sorry, I love using that quote. It's just so ridiculous, right? And by the way, if there are people that do need loans that go to these Ivy League schools, well, that's okay. Most of the time, they're able to pay them back fairly easily after they land a job at Goldman Sachs. They'll be fine. They'll be fine. So now, here's the thing. I don't have that much blame for them. I'm not attacking them. I'm just trying to kind of point out the mindset, where these people meet them where they're at, right? Which would be in the country club, apparently. But look, they live in this world. They're grown up in this world. They don't know anything outside this world. And so it's kind of not their fault that they don't understand, that they don't get it. They've never been exposed to the realities of being a member of the working class or the middle class. And they have no idea how much money that actually is. They don't understand the massive gap between the rich and the poor, and how they've been born with incredible amounts of privilege. Now, that same professor, by the way, said, look, don't be hard on these students. They don't understand these things, which, hey, you could probably teach them. And she probably is, to be fair. Now, I don't want to cash in on her or anything like that, because I think it's really interesting that she points that out. And so, and I'm glad she did, and I'm glad that it went viral. But she also posted on her thread a couple of studies, a link to a couple of studies. And I think these are pretty interesting, right? And just to show you how people, first of all, don't understand the income gap. And when they're presented with a model, with a society that has far more income equality than the United States, they're actually in favor of it. So let me show you this. This is from this it's from this study, right? So you can see there's, pie charts, right? And so you've got the USA, and that's the income distribution of the United States. And then you have the income distribution in Sweden. Okay. And then, of course, you have the third one, which is complete equal income distribution. All right. So now what's fascinating about this is, again, the level of income inequality in the United States. Now, let me give you some stats on that before I get back to this. The top 20% of Americans own 86% of the country's wealth. The bottom 80% own 14%. To further break it down, the top 10% held 69.8% of total US net worth. And the top 1% holds about half of that, about 30% of the total net worth. So here you have a very small group, thousands of people, holding massive amounts of wealth, holding more than what the actual middle class holds in wealth. Now, if you look at Sweden, right, on the top left, you notice that it's a little bit more balanced. Well, I mean, you look at the United States, way more balanced than the United States. And so now, in the study, people were shown this. And by the way, these were not labeled. And so nobody knew what was which, right? So now most people, when presented with this, believed that the Sweden pie chart was America, was the United States. They're like, oh yeah, no, the even pie chart, that's us. No, it's not. No, it's not. And now the study further points out the unlabeled United States distribution to the respondents was far less desirable as well than both the unlabeled Sweden and even the equal distribution, with some 92% of Americans preferring the Sweden distribution to the United States. In addition, this overwhelming preference for the Sweden distribution over the United States distribution was robust across several different metrics. First of all, gender. 92% of women preferred Sweden, 90% of men. Political affiliation. Now, of course, this is an older study, and so they looked at Democrats and Republicans. In this case, the 2004 election. Long time ago. Okay. So now, people who preferred George W. Bush still preferred the Swedish model at 90%. Whereas voters of John Kerry, Democratic voters, preferred at 93.5% the Swedish model. And of course, you look across income distributions. If you're making less than $50,000 a year, 92.1% of them preferred the Sweden model. If you're making it between 50 to 100,000, 91%. So very, very similar breakdowns. It is really kind of amazing. And even when you get over $100,000, still 89% of those making over $100,000 a year preferred the Swedish breakdown of wealth and income distribution. That's amazing. Now, in addition, there was also a slight preference for the distribution that resembled Sweden relative to the equal distribution, suggesting that Americans prefer some inequality to perfect equality, but not to the degree currently present in the United States. So that is really, really fascinating, this study. Just absolutely fascinating. And so what do I gain from this? I mean, there's a lot. But for one thing, it really kind of illustrates how people have no fucking clue how bad the wealth distribution is in this country. If they believe that we already have the Swedish model, and they go, oh yeah, no, we're pretty much even. I mean, we've got this upward mobility. Everything's fine. What are you talking about? We're all even. Look, the average American worker makes 6 figures. Oh, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. And so why? Why is this the case? Propaganda. Corporate media propaganda. And let me explain. Corporate media, as I pointed out many times in the show, that serves who? Well, it serves the corporations. It serves the donors, right? By design. Corporations, and by the way, corporate media is corporations. And so they prefer economic policies that do an uneven distribution, transfer of wealth from the middle class, the working class, to the very wealthy. And that's what we've seen. That's what we've seen in this country. A massive transfer of wealth from the middle to the top. And again, they do that because they are designed to maximize profits. They have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize profit. They have to. They have to. That's their one, they're a robot, and that is their one command. And so, look, in so doing, right, they will, of course, prioritize politicians and policies that serve that interest 100%. And so not only that, but these same corporations, as well as media companies, will then, of course, pay certain politicians in campaign bribes to stamp out policy that would actually more equally distribute wealth in this country to workers. So understand that that's what's going on. That's the situation here in this country that has happened for the last, 40, 50 years? Somewhere? Or you know, around that number of years? Very long time. And of course, a lot of that does come from money in politics that was introduced by the Supreme Court and by the Reagan administration. That said, right, a lot of people also are confused about what capitalism is, right? So now, let me break that down real simple. Because again, this is a result of capitalism as well. Unless you're investing in or an owner of a corporation, you are not a capitalist. You're a worker. People making $30,000 a year working in an office building, you're not a capitalist. You're a worker. Capitalists are those at the very, very top. Those are the people that are stealing the surplus value of your labor. You're not the capitalist. They're the capitalists. So, you know, that's the reality. That's the reality. And so once you realize that, you also realize that maybe you ought to stop listening to corporate funded media when they say things like, oh, we can't do universal health care. We can't tax the rich because that will destroy business and will destroy the company. The country. And it's because we're capitalists. That's why we can't tax the rich, because we're capitalists. It's not true. And it's just a way to continue that uneven, unequal transfer of wealth that goes from you to the very top.